Karen was devastated. It had happened again. The swimming pool in the backyard that she used to be so excited about had become a source of grief for her. That morning, when she had looked out the back window, she had seen something in the pool. Immediately, she had become so hysterical that it made her sick, as she had a pretty good guess at what was in the pool, and she was not wrong. Her father scooped the cat out of the water with an extra tenderness, as he was well aware that Karen was watching. "I'm sorry," he said. "I can't believe this happened again. We've got to find a way to keep them from getting in here." This was not the first stray cat that had met its demise in the pool. There had been several over the last year. They lived towards the country, pretty distant from the city, and stray cats were abundant. Karen loved cats, and even though they were strays, she felt as if they were all hers. Even though she had been told not to do this, she often put food out for them. She may not have realized it, but this act of kindness was probably contributing to the problem in the pool. There were always cats around, and sometimes one would fall into the swimming pool. After breakfast, her father began, "We will take him out to the graveyard." Obediently, she went back inside, although she continued crying. The graveyard he was referring to was a clearing in the woods of their backyard. In an effort to console her when this had started happening, he had told her they would give the cat a proper burial. Of course, this had all started with just one cat, and at the time he believed that would be the end of it, and she would forget all about it eventually. But little did he know that it would continue, and that one grave would be the start of a cat graveyard. As promised, after breakfast, they took care of the burial. With tears in her eyes, Karen looked at the spot and then at all of the others. Each grave was marked by a cross her father had made, but that was it. "There's so many," she said. "What about their names?" "Well, they didn't have names," he explained. "That's not fair," she said. "Everyone needs a name. I will name them all." He didn't argue with her, and she did as promised. Each grave represented a cat that had lived, and she assigned a name to each and every one of them. There was no harm in this, he thought, and it did not inconvenience him at all, until a couple days later, she began to insist that he paint the names she had chosen onto the crosses. "Can't you just remember them?" he asked. "Well, I can now," she said, "but what about when there's more? It would be terrible if there were so many and nobody knew their names. And what about 100 years from now when I am gone? Who will tell people the names? It isn't fair that they should be forgotten." "Okay," he said, "but we're going to fix this. We'll keep the cats out of the pool so there won't be any more." But he was wrong. There were more. There would always be more. As she grew into her teenage years, I guess you could say that she had acquired an obsession with cats. Anytime she saw a stray, she wanted to take it into the house and care for it. She wanted to protect them from the danger of the pool and from anything else in the world that could do them harm. Her mother and father were not on board with her taking in every cat that she saw, but they did allow her to have one. One summer, a litter of kittens had been found in the barn. Unfortunately, their mother had met the fate of the swimming pool. If there was any good news in this, it was that the kittens were just about old enough to be on their own. Almost. Karen wanted them. She wanted them all. Her father didn't mind strays being around, but he didn't really want any that they were responsible for. Finally, after her persistent pleas, he gave his permission for her to keep one of them. The rest he would take into the town, to the shelter, so they could find them good homes. Choosing which one to keep was not an easy task. In her mind, by selecting one, she was rejecting the others. This was heart-wrenching. After an eternity of sitting with the kittens and allowing them to climb all over her, she made her decision. There was one kitten that looked strange around his mouth. Two of his teeth were sticking out and looked kind of like fangs. Because of this abnormality, she thought he had a lower chance of someone wanting to take him home. So, this is the one she decided to call hers. "Why that one?" her father asked, and she explained her reasoning. "That's very insightful," he said. "You have great wisdom, just like King Solomon." "Solomon," she said thoughtfully. "That's a great name." And that is how Karen came into possession of Solomon, the cat. Solomon was a spoiled cat. As the years went by, she gave him everything he could have needed and more. Now that she was older, she took over the duties of taking the unfortunate cats out of the pool and putting them into the cat graveyard herself. With each one, the sadness was at least numbed a little with her knowledge that she had at least kept Solomon safe. She would never let anything happen to him. As a young adult, the time came for her to move into her own apartment, and when she did, of course, Solomon came with her. A few years after this, she was able to get a loan from the bank to purchase a small house in a small neighborhood. And again, Solomon made the move. About a dozen years or so since she first met him, the dreaded day finally came. Somewhere in the back of her mind, she always knew it would, but she tried not to think about it. But on this Tuesday morning, she was given no choice but to think about it. She had gotten out of bed that day just like any other day. When she was almost finished with her cup of coffee, it occurred to her that she had not heard or seen Solomon yet. This was unusual. He was always up and active in the mornings. She went to the room where his favorite bed was located in the corner. She saw him and dropped the almost empty mug of coffee. Solomon had breathed his last. She did not go to work that day. There's no way that she could have. Devastated does not even begin to describe how she was feeling. Later that afternoon, she finally came to terms with the truth that he was gone, and she knew what she was going to need to do. She drove him to her parents' house, went out into the woods, and buried him in the cat graveyard. She spent more time making his headstone than she ever had with any of the others. Weeks passed, and she couldn't get over her sadness. Friends at work tried to cheer her up, but to no avail. Her best friend Ava had a suggestion. "Karen, you could get another cat." "No," Karen said, "I can't. It would only remind me of Solomon, and that would be too painful." "Come on," Ava urged. "Let's just go and have a look. It will be fun." Karen continued to say no, but after several days, Ava wore her down. "I'll go with you, but I'm not getting another cat. Would that make you happy? Do you promise to hush about it if I go?" "I promise." So they went to the shelter. As soon as Karen started hearing the meows of cats, she almost started crying as she thought about her old friend Solomon. They spent well over an hour there, and during that time, Karen found herself falling back into her old ways. She still missed Solomon and always would, but she knew that her life would not be complete without a cat in it. So she got one. As it turns out, Ava got one too. Karen noticed that her life was much happier with a cat in it again, and she named this new cat Bambi. And she was very grateful that Ava had talked her into this. With a cat to take care of and keep her company, she was happy again. Several weeks later, Ava called her. "Hey, Karen," she began. "Hi, Ava. What's going on?" "Well, I have a favor to ask of you." "Anything for my best friend," Karen replied. "It's kind of a big favor, and I hate to be doing this, but do you think that you could take Oreo?" Oreo was the cat that Ava had gotten from the shelter. "Why?" Karen asked. "Is something wrong?" "No, not really. It's just I feel guilty because I'm so busy and I don't feel like I spend enough time with him, And I see how good you are with Bambi." Karen was a little taken back by this. She always loved her cats and couldn't understand how someone could give one up like this, but she thought about it. Oreo was a cat in need, and she always wanted to help the cats. "Okay," she said. "Sure, I'll take Oreo." And that is how Karen came into possession of 2 cats. Something about taking in Ava's cat flipped a switch inside of her. It wasn't too long before she had 3 cats, and then 4. Over the next year, she had accumulated a couple dozen. Now, when she first started getting a cat or 2, it didn't bother the neighbors. But now that there were dozens of them, it did. And every few days, they would see her arrive home with a new companion. Some stray she had found off, or a cat that someone online had listed as free to a good home. Some of them tried to talk to her about it in the beginning, but she wasn't listening. In her mind, she was doing a good thing. What everyone else was seeing was a person with an unhealthy addiction. Plus, there were now so many cats around that it was becoming ridiculous. It became really concerning when one neighbor had this discussion. "How do you afford the vet bills, Karen?" "Oh, I can't," she replied. "I don't take them to the vet. I just do the best I can." Now, with the knowledge that all of these felines were now running around through the neighborhood that could be carrying any number of diseases, the neighbors were now up in arms. Many neighborhoods have one, and Karen was indeed this neighborhood's crazy cat lady. "Can you believe this letter?" she asked Ava as she slapped it down in front of her while they were sitting down for their lunch break. Ava read it silently and then asked, "Karen, how many cats do you have?" Karen tried to give an answer and then realized that she didn't even know. Ava was stunned. "Karen, you don't know?" "Well," Karen started, "I only meant to get a few at first, but you know I can't say no to a cat that needs me. It's kind of gotten a little out of control." "A little? Listen, you have to do something about this." Karen stared back almost hopelessly. "But I don't know what to do." "You have to cut down on the number of cats you own." "I can't." "You have to, Karen. It says here if you don't, they are going to take all of them from you." Karen knew that what Ava said was right, but she didn't feel like this was right. Get rid of some of her cats? She couldn't stand the thought of it. And even if she did want to, how could she possibly choose which ones? But she could not allow this to happen. Nobody was going to take her cats from her. She took a 2-week vacation from work to sort this all out. The neighbors couldn't help but to keep an eye turned toward her property. She used to be a great neighbor, but they were all pretty annoyed with her now. They did notice something encouraging, though. They saw her get into her car with several of her cats, and when she returned, she no longer had them. Maybe she was finally taking this seriously. That was a good sign. 3 or 4 days in a row, they saw this same thing happen. After the 2 weeks was just about up, there were no cats at all running around her house, inside or out. On that day, the lady next door greeted her as she arrived home. "Karen," she said, attempting to patch up their strained relationship over the cat saga. "How are you? Would you like to come over for some coffee?" "No thanks," she replied sharply. Sensing she was sensitive about being forced to remove the cats from the property, the neighbor tried to ease the tension. "I'm very sorry about the cats," she started. "I know how much you love them, but you didn't have to give them all away. You could have kept a few." "I didn't give any of them away," she replied. "Oh, you sold them?" the neighbor asked. "No," said Karen. "They are my cats. Nobody can ever have them but me." After this statement, she started to remove some items from the trunk of her car to take into the garage. Among these items was a shovel. covered in the mud that came from the cat graveyard. If you enjoyed this story, if you wouldn't mind clicking like, that would be appreciated. This is Custom Storyteller. We do have several other videos on the channel. If you have not listened to the stories, I would encourage you to go back and do so. Also, if you haven't subscribed, if you could click subscribe and then hit the notification bell so that you won't miss any future videos. If you have a suggestion or a request for a topic for a story, you can email the email that you see on your screen. And so again, thank you for listening, and goodbye.